Welcome to Momentum Boost. I'm Adrienne Gold Davis, the host of Momentum Boost, and I'm one of the trip leaders for Momentum. At Momentum, we aim to help you live your best and most meaningful life by connecting to Jewish values, by engaging with Israel, by taking action, and by fostering unity without uniformity. Today, we're going to explore part 3 in our Justice series about how to take action by creating inclusive homes and communities. Because when we know better, my friends, we do better. So let's get started. It's time for today's boost. And as always, if you have any questions at all, just enter them in the Q&A box that Zoom provides, and we will monitor it for you throughout the webinar. For today's webinar, we are thrilled to welcome Yavila McCoy. Yavila is the CEO of Dimensions Inc. in Boston. She has spent the past 20 years working extensively in multi-faith communities and partnering specifically with the Jewish community to engage issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She has been a pioneer leader, an activist, and a mentor for the empowerment of Jews of color for most of her life. And she's here to help all of us take action. Please join me in welcoming Yavila. There you are.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time out of your extraordinarily busy schedule to help inform the thousands of Jewish mothers who are going to be listening to your voice right now. I'm very, very grateful. If it's okay with you, I want to begin with a question. I imagine that you personally have experienced much of what you've sought out to repair in the world in your work. But we would love it if you could begin with you sharing some of your personal experiences as a Black Jewish mother. That would be amazing.
Okay, well, good morning. Good afternoon to some. I'd like to begin by talking about, I guess, the path toward parenting that I've taken as a Black Jewish woman who's the mother of 4 Black Jewish children and who was partnered with a Black Jewish man in the context of our Jewish family.
I'd love it.
The beginning of our journey, I guess, starts with birth. And my daughter, Atara, was my first child. And I think when I had Atara, what's most memorable about my experience of giving birth to her was how much joy there was in our family at the birth of my mother's first grandchild. My mother was in the labor room with me, and my husband was there, of course, distanced appropriately. But when Atara first came out, she lifted her head up like as a newborn off of my shoulder and like kind of looked me in the eye. And I knew that I was going to be in for an experience in order to preserve that much power and intelligence and insightfulness and present in body, mind, and spirit that I could see in the eyes of this young Black child. And so, my mother had a phrase about us being born to her, which was that on the day that we were born, that Hashem put her hand on her hip and said, this one's gonna be good. And this idea of like just joy, that to be born into the world as we were was a gift from Hashem to the world, was a gift to ourselves, was a gift to anybody that encountered us. So this is the beginning of my life and my daughter's life, joy. As time went on, though, and as we engaged in institutions, there were ways in which I found myself in the role as a parent, as a protector of that joy. One of my grandfather's favorite sayings was, "Don't ever let anyone steal your joy," which was a way in which we learned to protect ourselves from the onslaught of racism. But the other thing was also to protect that consciousness that you are a gift to the world, sometimes runs in the opposite direction of what racism does to a Black child. One of the very first things that I had to figure out when I first put my child into yeshiva in St. Louis was we were standing in line for registration, and my daughter's super excited to be in the line. She's going to start, nursery school. And while we're in line, there's a parent in front of us who is holding the hand of their child, and their child keeps looking backward at us in the line and staring at Atara, staring at me. And so we smile. And then at one point, the child taps their mother and says in a above whisper, loud enough for us to hear, "Mommy, are they Jewish?" And the mother turns around, looks at us, grabs the child closer to her and tells her to shush. The mother doesn't say, "Of course they are." The mother doesn't say, "Why would you ask that?" The mother says, "Shh," pulls the child closer to her. So then I had to be immediately in the role of protecting my child. I had to protect her from hearing that somebody her age that was probably going to be in her class had questions about whether she was Jewish. I had to protect her from a parent that had no resources with which to speak to their child in the moment about a hurt that they were inflicting on another child their age. And I had to protect my own heart from the experience of being terrifically scared in that moment of what I was about to put my child into by putting them as the only Black child in the classroom into a Jewish institution that may or may not be prepared to welcome them as not just a beautiful Jewish, joyous bundle, a gift, but also as someone who is going to need protection from racism in our environment.
I want to ask you something. It's heartbreaking. I, what should she have said to the mother standing at the line whose child asks them that question? And the question was, the question was a child's question. The response was meant to be an adult's response. What would have been the preferred response and reaction to the child?
So at this point, I kind of, I'm talking more about systems than I'm talking about individuals in terms of my being the CEO of this family. And I think what I would have liked was for there to be more brown faces, for there to be more education in the environment, for there to be more proactive activity within the school and within our community to teach all members of our community that we are actually a multiracial community.
Right.
That when someone's skin looks like mine, and when someone's skin is brown like my daughter's, it's not anomalous to Judaism. It actually is ancient and ancestral. Because I've never seen anyone come from Mesopotamia, Africa, or the Middle East who was born there and lived there for generations, whose skin was white. In each of those spaces, people's skins are naturally brown because of the temperature of the sun, because of the environment, because what it means to be a body that is brown is not something that is supposed to elicit racism. It's just as natural as the brown earth that we traverse every single day. So what I needed was more information in the environment so that the compulsion wasn't just on that parent. The compulsion was on all of us as a community to be better and to make room for all of us, including our children, not to have to go through experiences like my daughter did before we could even start in the system.
Well, you're absolutely right. But I mean, things begin at home. You're the CEO of the organization you work for, but every mother is the CEO of her family. And as such, she has an obligation, I believe, to be anti-racist and to be inclusive, but specifically so. And the question is, how do we do that? Because the mother who said to her child really wanted to say to her child, "You're being rude." But what she should have said to her child, I don't know, I think maybe what I would have said was, "Well, is she standing here in line for Jewish school? I would imagine she's Jewish. Why would you ask such a question?" But then I have to say, I'm fast on my feet, and the majority of people are not necessarily so. They're more concerned about causing pain or embarrassment. And
Yeah.
that's not the end of the world. So you feel like, given the fact that most of us, and most of the women watching you here, are at schools that there may not even be one brown face. Where do we begin at home to let them see the multitude of colors of the Jewish people of the world?
That's why I think I said I don't go to individuals, because a lot of people, a lot of parents, I think, believe that when there's not a Jew of color in their environment, there's a pass on having to get educated, or there's a pass in having to promulgate that Jews are multiracial and multicolored, because there's no Jews of color here. So therefore, we don't need to make that connection. What I'm saying is, whether there are Jews of color present in the environment or not, we as parents have responsibility to teach our children that the Jewish people are a multiracial people, and that we didn't just get that way because a couple of new people came to our school. We got that way because we've been that way since antiquity. And in all ways, we can welcome our understanding of the Torah. In all ways, we can welcome our understanding of our history, of our laws, of our canon, of the fact that if I were to snap my finger right now and bring all Jews that actually exist right now in the world onto this Zoom with us, we would look more like the United Nations than the United Nations itself. To teach that to our children at home is our responsibility. And yet we are in systems that are educating our children for us. Atara was 4. So if at 4, my child is spending most of her day in a yeshiva education system where I'm trusting others to give her an education, there has to be a both and between what's happening at home and what's happening in our systems that are going to keep Black children in Jewish institutional environments safe.
You're right. Just let me ask you something. Have you ever advised schools about how to create a system within the school so that that representation happens?
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about it.
So there are lots of different things about what we're doing with schools. So I'm going to talk about what happens in my home, and I'm also going to talk about what needs to happen outside of my home.
Okay.
So in my home, there are things like play dates. If you have very young children, the beginning of the journey is with play dates. And if you're a mom of color and you have to chase down other people to create play dates, or if the play dates always have to be at the white child's home, we're already starting our young people in an educational system that says that other people's homes, other people's ways of being matter more, feel safer, feel more comfortable than your own home. So the first thing is, how are we as parents sending our children for play dates over to people of color's homes so that at a young age, people are getting educated as to what it means to grow up in a Black family? In the context of things like carpools, in the context of things like setting up bat mitzvahs, in the context of doing chesed, in the context of doing all sorts of things where we're relying on a social network that's primarily white, what are the ways in which we can diversify those acts of reaching out, those acts of connection as parents? So if we know that there's a parent of color in our community that isn't included in a carpool, do we offer to go to that person's house and pick up their child so that our children are interacting with their children?
Do we fight over it? Do we fight over it? Would be ideal.
I don't know, but these are the places where I can say as a mother that I experienced misses. Over the course of our time together I've lived in both St. Louis and I lived in Boston. And I did find that I had to be extremely resilient in terms of making sure that my kids were resourced, because we were not the first ones that people call for carpool, and we were not the first ones that people call for a ride to a bar mitzvah, and we were not the first ones. And it wasn't because we didn't live in the center of town. It's because our lives were not proximate to each other. And when you pick up the phone and you're chatting with Hindi or Chaya or Miriam about what you and your parents have shared for generations, or the ways in which you hop in the car and go to BJ's together, or the ways in which you're circumnavigating people of color all the time, but they are not a part of your life, in the context of the way we end up in community with one another, though we as people of color remain missing from that experience too. And I think the start of our work to raise children who can hold justice and equity is putting them in proximate relationship with people of color. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is what we can do in the schools themselves. I mean, there's always reading books and sharing history and being aware of language and how we use language differently. I mean, in the context of Brandeis, I did an educators conference for Brandeis, and there's a video of me online talking about this. But for teachers and for parents, the one thing that I think is most important for people to do is watch how you use the term we. I'm using we very liberally right now because I'm a Black woman and I'm often talking to an audience of majority white Jewish folk who often don't always agree with me that they're white, but are very clear that I'm Black. So with
Wait a minute, slow down. Say that again and tease that out for me a bit. I'm not sure that might have.
I said that there's ways in which, in the context of the Jewish communities that I'm speaking to, people aren't completely sure that they are white. They often say, well, what if I don't identify as white? And I often have to say to them, that's great. Is it all right if I don't identify as Black? And with us not identifying as white and black, are we both going to walk through the same world and experience the same impacts? So that's kind of what we're talking about here in the context of what we need to understand when we use the pronoun we. The pronoun we means it's inclusive of all who are here. And I've had to teach teachers how not to use the pronoun we and somehow unconsciously really be meaning white people or white Jewish people. Have we learned in the context of our education, in the context of our history, in the context of the way we teach, to use a we that is inclusive of more than just white history?
Give me an
More,
example. Give me an example of what that would look like. What would that look
so I'll give you the example from the article
Okay.
that I wrote and the video. The article said that, you know, my daughter was in 5th grade and she was learning Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. And the teacher in the front of the room was saying, we need to learn how to identify with the fact that there are people in this country who are descendants of slaves, and that slavery left a legacy in our country that disenfranchised them, that caused certain conditions for them. And when she's using we and them, she's unconsciously naming that we as Jewish folk in this room have to understand the experiences of those Black folk. And my daughter is in the classroom. My daughter's history at that point has been erased. She is not one of the white we that have to learn how to identify or become proximate to a Black them. She is a Black child who is Jewish, who's sitting in that classroom, hearing herself outed from a more global experience of what our understanding of Tikkun Olam must hold. So to mess with that we a little bit would mean to talk about the ways in which we as a Jewish people have different entry points to the concept of race and racism in this country. That some of us who were brown had one experience as Jews, and some of us who were white got to have another experience as Jews. That it is incumbent upon all of us to welcome a we that tells the story of all of us. That's an example of the way in which unconsciously in a classroom, the way we think, the way we understand ourselves either isolates or includes people of color as a part of our environment. Now, as parents, we're doing the same thing. You're the primary teacher while you're standing at the kitchen sink, or when you're sitting at the table, or when you're hanging out with your kids. How are you using we? And is your we a we that speaks to a multiracial reality for us as a Jewish community?
I have to tell you that I'm shaken because I'm quite certain that I've never heard the we expressed in such a way that it could be divisive in that way, and I'm sure that I have used it without consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you an audience question because my chat is blowing up here? Okay, I'm just going to stop you for 1 minute. You can do it. How do we create an environment to feel safe asking questions to enlighten ourselves and not ashamed because we don't know or ask the question in the first place from a place of ignorance?
So how do we educate ourselves?
Well, I think that what she's saying, what this writer is saying is she's afraid to ask the question because she's afraid of being shamed. And while there are many questions that the answers should be obvious, and it is shameful that we don't know, I think that many of us now are saying, teach me, tell me. That we is a first step. It's tragic why this has come to the foreground again. What happened to precipitate something that's been going on forever? But it seems to me that there is a fear. There is a fear of asking the question as well, as though somehow you look ignorant just for asking it. Is the fear of ignorance, do you think, more prevalent than the fear of being anti-racist?
It's possible. But again, I'm going to go to that we that starts from the time you have a child.
Okay,
Race is a construct.
indeed.
Race is not real. I am not Black. I'm a human being. And a person is not white. They are a human being. The question is, how do our systems, our laws, our policies structure us in society to believe that whiteness is so salient to our humanity that I can't even open my mouth and speak words to another human being without whiteness and Blackness being between us?
There's no question. There's no question, Yuvila, you're correct.
So I was speaking to a group the other evening of LGBT an LGBT Orthodox community, and they were asking me, "So Yavila, like, how do we begin? How do we begin to build relationships? Like, what do we say?" And I asked them, "What was the thing you said to your parents when you came out to help them to remember your humanity and to stay in beloved community with you across your difference?" As a human being, even though they are not Black, they can understand what it means to be hurt from being isolated from somebody else's understanding of what holds humanity and what does not. I
Okay,
think
I want to stop for a minute. I want to ask you something. Sorry, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you identify as a Jewish woman as well. Is Judaism is not a construct? I mean, we believe metaphysically that our souls have a particular what's the word? Not better or not worse, but certainly the soul. That's why when you convert, is there's an idea that you get a different soul. So if the body we know from a Jewish perspective is meant to be the container that holds the eternal thing, which is the soul. So the color of it or the shape of it for that matter, or the gender of it for that matter, shouldn't matter.
there's shoulds and there's what we have. We've got
Okay,
to
so
live in the world we're in, not imagine ourselves to be in a world that does not yet exist. And unfortunately, because we live in a world where there is racism and white supremacy, we have our humanity has been robbed from us by the presence of racism and white supremacy. That's something that impacts all of us. And I think what's so important, especially in this day and age, for parents to welcome is that you did not give birth to a white or a Black child. You gave birth to a human. And when you gave birth to that human, their humanity is being robbed from them every single day that they live in systems and structures and under laws and policies that differentiate between humans based on race. That is not often things that we created. There's going to be a day where they get a choice about creating a different society. But from the day they came into your arms, from the day they were born into this world, they were human. And we have a job as protectors and as parents to preserve that humanity by keeping racism constructs, racism policies, racism laws out of the purview of what gets to raise our children.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. But we can't control the entire system at this moment. We can control what's happening in our families. We can be the CEO of our own family. So tell me right now on one foot, where do we begin? Where do we start? Do we have a
Adrian, I don't know that I agree with that. I think that children that were born into families eventually become governors. I think that people who were born into families eventually get to make decisions about policing systems
but
in
that's
their.
my point. Start when they're young.
So when they're young, how do you preserve their humanity? How do you find ways, even when you're uncomfortable, about telling your children why people are in the streets crying out for justice? About having conversations about how there are laws and systems that they're living under that actually create harm and suffering to families that live not just 1 or 2 or 3 blocks away from them, but all around them. How do you have conversations with young people about life being about us being in relationship with Torah and with mitzvot and with our ethics and our values because it shapes our moral conscience? I don't believe that my Judaism is a race. I believe that my Judaism is a commitment. It's a commitment to live in relationship with God in a way that makes me more accountable to all humanity.
Amen.
Teach that
Amen.
to our children, that we remain accountable regardless of our privilege, regardless of our power, regardless of our skin color. In a system that has legislated inequity, we become more equitable every time we teach our kids to be morally conscious and accountable to our humanity.
I couldn't agree with you more, but how? Tell me how you start that conversation with a 4-year-old. I mean, it's over the head of
4-year-old.
many adults.
So I'll tell you what, I'll give you an example.
Please.
There's a way in which even now, when I meet folks and when I'm hanging around with folks who are a part of our multiracial network and family, people have learned not to ask me how, they've learned to ask me what.
All right, what?
Because it's not my responsibility, right, as a Black woman to teach the entire world how to give up its white supremacy. White folks can talk to white folks about their experience and what they know and what they don't know, and then hopefully prepare themselves to be in a loving and beloved relationship with me. So the way that looks is that, one time I was driving carpool and I had 4 white children and my young child, Atara, in the back seat of my car. And we were driving around and innocently, like you say, four, right? One of these 4-year-olds looks me into the rearview mirror and goes, Mrs. McCoy, Atara's black. And I look back in my rearview mirror and I go, yes, Atara's black. And I look over at Atara, and Atara, where they had all been giggling and laughing in the back seat, it got quiet. Because even at 4 years old, believe it or not, our young people are aware of race and racism. And so they were scared. They wondered if something had been said that was going to hurt Atara. And I wondered whether something had been said that was going to hurt Atara. So I looked in the rearview mirror at Atara. I locked eyes with her and I said, yes, Atara is black. Atara is black. Atara is black. Woo, woo, woo. Atara is black. Y'all sing with me now. Atara is black.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Atara is black. And young children who can flip in and out of nuance so easily because they embrace humanity. Their highest calling when they come out of your womb is to embrace humanity. They learn to differentiate between each other and to accept and reject each other. So those children singing in the back of my car became my allies. They became my allies to help my daughter to contextualize her blackness as something of joy. I can't do that by myself. Parents have to learn how to do that too. And I have to be able to trust that if those kids are in the back of my car, or if they're in the back of your car, or if they're in the back of anybody's car, that you are going to be ready to give those children their humanity and to protect it with everything that you've got. That's not a Yavila tell me what to do. That's a who are you on an everyday that makes it possible for people to be around you and get a glimpse of the truth. That's the best I can say, Adrienne. I can't tell people what to do. I can ask you who you are and how you show.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, when I'm and if I'm first of all, I'm not saying what, I'm saying how. If I'm hearing this properly, you are saying that from the time a child is small, that differences aren't things that but they are things that we celebrate. You notice something, you celebrate it, as opposed to you differentiate and you separate. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying multiple things. I'm saying don't use we in a way that means whiteness in Jewish spaces. I'm saying don't raise your children to be part of a we that makes them think they're white as Jewish and not a part of a multiracial community. I'm saying when you encounter multiracial environments as a teacher, as an educator, as a child, what are the ways in which we must affirm humanity and have words and quick ways to be able to lean into humanity with our young ones so that they don't lose it in the space of a quick statement like, ooh, you're black. What are the ways as parents that we have to be prepared to not just talk about one-to-ones, but systems, but ways that families that are and are not like ours are suffering right now because of the inequities of the laws, the policies and practices that our families are impacted by. That's what I'm saying we have to do as parents. We have to lean in and not be scared, but not lean into being uncomfortable. Lean into your humanity and what Judaism teaches us about humanity that you are willing to protect and not have be lost in the context of a racist paradigm and structure.
Nabila, I have a feeling that this conversation is going to be shared around the world. I feel humbled by having the opportunity to pick your brain a little bit, to ask you how and why and what, and to figure out what that means and how we can be problematic. I've learned so much. I am extraordinarily grateful for your time and your energies today. I honestly am. Thank you.